Hi, boys and girls. Back to reading the Magic Tree House. I've kind of set up my little sparkly area here, and we're going to continue on with Midnight on the Moon, which is number 8. And we left off with Jack and Annie, coming across somebody on the moon. They don't really know who it was. They call him the Moon Man, and that's the name. Here's a picture of him. That's the name of the chapter 7 that we're about to start. The Moon Man. Jack and Annie have also tried to leap using the lack of gravity on the moon to jump over this big boulder, and they've both fallen down. And I believe Annie has said to Jack, he's here, the Moon Man is here. And Jack said, what? He's standing above me. Jack's heart nearly stopped. He could hear Annie talking. Hi, we come in peace, she said. There was silence, and then Jack heard Annie say, thank you. I have to help my brother get up too now. A moment later, Annie rolled Jack onto his back. She grabbed his hand and pulled him up. Thanks, said Jack. Once he was standing, the Moon Man was just a few feet away. His face was hidden by a metal visor. He looked like a spaceman, a huge spaceman with a giant tank on his back, and it was almost as big as a refrigerator. That's a jetpack, said Jack. I've seen them in pictures of future astronauts flying with those things. It's like a mini spaceship, right? The Moon Man said nothing and just looked at them. I don't think he can hear us, said Annie. He's not hooked up to our radio. Oh, said Jack. I'll write him a message. Good idea. Jack pulled out his notebook and his pencil, and he wrote, we are Jack and Annie. We come in peace from America. Who are you? Jack handed the note and his pencil to the Moon Man, and they looked tiny in his big hands. And here's a picture of the Moon Man. And I was just realizing in the picture, I have a picture of my little baby Chihuahua back in the corner here sleeping in the sun. I wondered if you noticed that. And I'm also channeling a few students here with my kitty cat ears. So these ones are going out to, well, you know who you are. The Moon Man looked down at the message, and he looked at the tiny pencil, and then he turned the notebook over. Jack and Annie watched as the Moon Man put the pencil to paper. He was drawing something very carefully, and finally he gave the notebook back to Jack, and he and Annie stared at the marks. Stars? Said Annie. He drew stars. Well, maybe it's like a space map, said Jack. Space map, said Annie. Hey, Jack, map. Map starts with M. Wow, said Jack. This must be the fourth thing we need, a map. Hey, let's ask him what this map means. Annie turned around. Well, we're never going to know now, he said. Why, said Jack. That's why, pointed Annie. The Moon Man had left them and was now flying over the mountains. Annie and Jack waved thank you. There's a picture of what the Moon Man drew. The stars that he drew. I wonder if you can figure out just by that picture what that's supposed to be. All right, chapter 8. One star to another. Who was that guy? Said Jack. And what does a map mean? I don't know, but let's see if it works. Jack took a deep breath. Yeah, I think we better hurry back. I think I'm running out of air. It's starting to feel harder to breathe. Me too, said Annie. Go slow and don't breathe too much. He and Annie took long, floating steps towards the moon base, and Jack held his breath as if he were underwater. By the time they got to the white dome, he was ready to burst, and Annie pushed a button aside, and the huge door slid open. They hurried into the airlock, and the door closed behind them. The door to the hallway opened. Jack opened his visor with the helmet, and he took a long, deep breath, and he let it out. Ah, he said. Let's get out of these big suits, said Annie. Good idea, said Jack. And as they moved clumsily into the spacesuit storeroom, Jack started to feel heavy and normal again. He and Annie unlocked each other's helmets, gloves, and boots, and they put everything off, and they stepped out of their bulky suits. Phew, said Jack. He took his glasses off and rubbed his eyes. It was great to be free, even if he no longer felt as light as a feather. Hurry, Peanut's waiting, said Annie. She led the way down the steps towards the bright landing chamber. Yay, she said softly, and Jack was revealed to see that the treehouse was still there and that they'd soon be headed home. He couldn't wait. Jack and Annie crawled through the treehouse window. "We're back, Peanut!" Squeak! Squeaked the mouse, running over to the M on the floor. "We missed you too," said Annie. "Well, you know what? We met a moon man out there," said Annie to the mouse. "And sorry, Peanut, but you're going to have to move," said Jack. "We're going to need to put this map on top of the M." So Annie gently lifted the mouse off the M, and Jack tore the picture that the Starman had drawn from his notebook and placed it on the M next to the mammoth bone, the mango, and the moonstone. He sighed, and then he sat back on his heels. "Hand me the Pennsylvania book," he said. They needed the Pennsylvania book to drive back home. But there was silence. Jack turned and looked at Annie. "It's not working, Jack. The book's not here." "What? What do you mean it's not here?" "Well, that map must be the wrong thing." They both looked around the treehouse. "It's definitely not here," said Annie. Oh no. Jack's heart began to sink. He picked up the star map and stared at it. Squeak! Squeak! Peanut jumped out of Annie's arms and scurried back to the letter M on the floor. "I've got an idea," said Jack, and he reached into his backpack and took out his pencil. "What are you doing?" said Annie. "Well, you know how you can draw a constellation?" said Jack. "You connect all the stars and see what happens. Let's try it." So he drew a line from one star to another, and he kept drawing until all the stars were connected. "Let me see that," said Annie. Jack held the paper out so that they could both study it. "Hey, that looks like a mouse." "Yeah, it does," said Jack. And there's the picture of the Starman's mouse. "Is there such a thing as a mouse constellation in the sky?" "I don't think so," said Jack. "Squeak!" said the mouse. Annie and Jack looked over at Peanut again, and she was standing on top of the M. "Oh, wow," said Jack. Annie whispered, "I think I know what that fourth M thing is." "Me too," said Jack. It's a mouse," they both said together. "Squeak, squeak," said Peanut. "Maybe the spell is moonstone, mango, mammoth bone, mouse." Jack touched each M thing as he whispered them together. And I want all of you who are watching me to say these like we would if we were reading at the carpet in our classroom. So I want you to repeat them after me. Maybe use your fingers like I am. Moonstone, mango, mammoth bone, mouse. Moonstone, mango, mammoth bone, mouse. "Let's say it over and over," said Annie, and they did. Together they chanted. Moonstone, mango, mammoth bone, mouth. Moonstone, mango, mammoth bone, mouse. Oh, it's a tongue twister. And suddenly, a very bright light filled the treehouse. The light got brighter and brighter and brighter, and almost blinding their eyes. The brightness was whirling and swirling, and the air spun. And then everything was clear. Peanut, the mouse, was gone, and Morgan Le Fay stood before Jack and Annie. Chapter 9, Morgan. "Thank you," said Morgan. "You have freed me from my magician's spell." Sorry. A reminder to cough into our elbow when we feel it. You were Peanut," said Annie, "the whole time?" Morgan smiled and nodded. "Really? You mean the whole time you were with us on all of our missions?" Morgan smiled again. "Well, why did we have to go on those missions if we already had the mouse? You were always with us." "You needed to break the spell, and we had to be on the moon to do it. You could have broken the spell the minute we arrived on the moon." "Oh, that's why that's why you were trying to tell us something when we first got here," said Annie. "And we didn't need to leave the moon base at all?" Morgan smiled and said, "No, you didn't." "But the moon man came along to help us," said Annie. "You know, he drew like a constellation of a mouse." "Hey, is he a friend of yours?" Morgan shrugged. "Let's just say that we had to have a little talk. He popped by the moon base while you were out." "The same way you had a little talk with the ninja master," said Jack. "And the monkey?" "Oh, and the sorcerer." Morgan smiled. "I always squeak to the ones that can help me." But how did they understand you? You were a mouse at the time. Morgan smiled. Certain wise beings, understand the language of little creatures, said Morgan. I bet it was you who turned the pages of the book every time, said Annie, to show us where we needed to go. Morgan nodded. You're correct. But who turned you into a mouse? How did that happen? Morgan frowned. Well, you see, there's a certain person who likes to play tricks on me. His name is Merlin. Merlin? Said Jack. You mean the greatest magician who's ever lived? Morgan sniffed. He's not that great, she laughed. He doesn't even know that I have two very brave friends that are always ready to help me. There's a picture of Morgan here. Us, you mean us, ready to help you. Yes, and I thank you both with all of my heart. Oh, you're welcome, said Jack and Annie. Morgan handed Annie the Pennsylvania book. Are you ready to go home now? Yes. Annie pointed to the picture of Frog Creek Woods. I wish we could go there. The treehouse began to spin. It spun faster and faster. And then everything was still, absolutely still, but only for a moment. Chapter 10, Earth Life. The midnight woods woke up. There was a rustling of leaves and a hooting of an owl and the soft sounds of everything that was alive. Jack opened his eyes and pushed his glasses into place, and he smiled. Morgan was still with them. He could see her in the moonlight, with her long white hair shining. Morgan, can you and the treehouse stay here for a while in Frog Creek Woods? Said Annie. No, I'm sorry, she said. I have to leave, I'm afraid. I've been gone from Camelot way too long. She handed Jack his backpack and then brushed his cheek with her hand. A bit of moon dust is still on you, she said. Thank you, Jack, for your great love of knowledge. You're welcome. Thank you, Morgan, and thank you, Annie, for your belief in all things the impossible. Go home now, said Morgan. Jack smiled. Annie smiled. You're welcome. Home was Earth. It was bright and colorful, and everything around them seemed alive and chirping. Bye, Morgan, said Annie. She started out of the treehouse, but Jack looked back at Morgan. Will you come back to us soon? Anything can happen, said Morgan. You never know. The universe is filled with wonders, isn't it? Said Jack. They both smiled and nodded. Go now, said Morgan. Jack followed Annie down the rope ladder, and he stepped out onto the ground. The wind started to blow, the trees started to shake, and a loud roar filled Jack's ears. He squeezed his eyes shut, and he looked up. Everything was still. Jack opened his eyes, and the treehouse was gone. He looked through the trees at the branches where the treehouse had been, but now only moonlight was. Bye, Morgan, he whispered. Bye, Peanut, laughed Annie. Jack and Annie stared up at the top of the tree for a really long time. You ready to go back? Said Annie. Jack nodded. They started to walk their way home. The midnight air felt cool and moist, and it filled their soft sounds of life. Jack and Annie left the treehouse. They started down the street, and Annie glanced up at the sky. You know, the moon looks really far away from here, doesn't it? It did, thought Jack. I mean, it kind of was far. I wonder how that moon man can be up there, all alone, said Annie. What do you mean, said Jack. Well, I mean, who put him in his spacesuit? Who helps him get up when he falls down, like we did? And who is he? Thought Jack. Well, who do you think he was? Said Annie. Well, I kind of think he's like a scientist or an astronaut from Earth, said Jack. Well, I say no. I think he's an alien, said Annie. From another galaxy. Oh, that doesn't make sense. How do you think that? Well, I just feel it, said Annie. Well, I think you're wrong. There's no proof that aliens even exist. Maybe not now, said Annie. But don't forget, we were in the future when we were on the moon. Oh, brother, thought Jack. He crossed the yard and they climbed all their way into their back steps, and Annie tiptoed inside the house. Jack followed, but before he shut the door, he glanced up one more time at the moon. Was Annie right? He wondered. Could the moon man have come from another galaxy? Morgan's words came back to him. The universe is filled with wonders, isn't it, Jack? Good night, moon man, Jack whispered, and then he closed the door. There's just a little picture right here of the moon. All right, there's the end of number 8. I hope you guys are enjoying my story time. It's not quite the same without all of you listening so intently, and you've always been amazing during story time. I appreciate that. But anyway, it's still nice to do these for you, and I hope you're all doing well. Miss you. Bye.